Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this talk of the Leeds Philosophical and Literary Society. My name's Eric Blair. I'm president of the Society, and I'd like to warmly welcome all of you, whether you're members of the Society or you're visitors. Thank you for joining. So just very briefly before Rachel introduces David, just to talk a little bit about the museum and about the Society. And I think the history of the City Museum is very much embedded in the history of the Society. As you all probably know, we began in 1819, and already by 1821, the Society built Philosophical Hall in Park Row. There is, I think, still a blue plaque that marks where it was. And at that time, of course, it was very much an era for collecting, and the members of the Society almost literally scoured the world and brought back myriad objects which they displayed in the Philosophical Hall. And that went on for a century, exactly, to 1921, when the Society transferred Philosophical Hall and the collection and the museum to the Council of Leeds for a public museum for the benefit of the city of Leeds. So our histories are very much intertwined. And so it's a very great pleasure to welcome David Hopes tonight, who's the new director of the Leeds Museums and Galleries. And thank you very much, David, for giving up your time to be with us tonight. And now I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who will introduce you. Rachel.
Thank you. Yes, welcome, David. A new director, but already a year into the job, which is, of course, much more than just in huge inverted commas, the successor to the museum that was the Phil and Lit. Many different sites around the district and a great range of responsibilities that he's come to take over. He came to us from Scotland, the National Trust for Scotland for 5 years, and before that director of the Robert Burns Birthplace Museum, and he's still on the board there, keeping up his links with his home country. And he has a degree in English literature from the Open University, and did museum studies at Leicester, as many people do, and then a PhD in Birmingham on the way that cultural artifacts can be included in digital learning. Well, what a good grounding to arrive in Leeds in the middle of a pandemic, where the digital was such a strong element of how we were still keeping going. There's a long tradition, of course, but I asked David how he's going to pull this tradition through into the present day and into the future, and perhaps include in this talk some aspects of what he brings to this personally. So not just what the strategy is and how they're going about implementing it, but also how his own background and predilections and personality even are helping to shape the way forward for the Leeds Museum. So over to you, David. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to pin your video.
Cheers, Rachel, and thanks, Eric. Thanks to the Society for the collection, as Eric was mentioning. Thanks for your ongoing support. We get a lot of support, financial and otherwise, from the Phil and Lit Society, so we're very grateful to the Society for that, and also for the opportunity to speak tonight. So it's the opportunity to share the new strategy of Leeds Museums and Galleries and some of the thinking and work behind it. It's the first time I've spoken in public about the strategy. In fact, the strategy hasn't yet been finally approved, but we're very confident of that and hopeful at the same time that it will be approved on the 16th of March by our executive board and the council. So I hope to cover three things in this short talk tonight. What makes the strategy different? Where will the strategy take us? And something about the process and what I've perhaps brought to that. So something about my own prejudices, experience, and insight, I suppose. But before I do that, why do we need another strategy? Well, following the success of a decade of expansion, we have 9 sites in and around Leeds. The service has done extremely well, but it's feeling stretched from the more recent experience of the pandemic. And I think we're operating under a new value system. The market has changed for everything and everyone. What matters has changed to the public. We're also entering a climate of economic uncertainty, and we can't rely on the 2 main sources of funding that we have at the moment. We get £5.6 million a year from the council and 1.6 million from Arts Council England. Those are our 2 main income sources, as well as raising about 1.3 ourselves from retail, admissions, catering, etc. There are also changing demands from the cultural consumer and different measures of success. For example, relevance and inclusion are becoming increasingly important to the market and consumers. Environmental responsibility is also emerging as an important consideration. Health and well-being is increasingly important, and people's digital expectations have also risen, especially during the pandemic. Indeed, the council has changed its strategy in the past year. So we used to have the best city plan. We're now moving to the best city ambition, which stresses 3 main things: inclusive growth, an objective of reaching carbon net zero by 2030, and health and well-being as a way of a package of measures, if you like, which addresses inequality in the city. For those reasons, our strategy is called Deepening Connections, Widening Impact, because this phase of Leeds Museums and Galleries development is a rebuilding and needs to focus on quality and depth, as well as extending and diversifying to make sure that our impact is felt here in Leeds and beyond. Thank goodness my slides move on. So this is a sneak preview of the front page of the new strategy, Deepening Connections, Widening Impact. The main phrase in the strategy is here on the right-hand side. Our vision is to create deeper connections with the people we serve, using the collections and sites we care for, and to widen our impact on the world. We believe that by deepening our relationships and understanding of what we do, we will amplify our impact. So that's the key association, really, the key connection that's made in the strategy document itself. And I'll speak later in the talk about how that came about. You'll find the key themes of depth and width across the strategy, but just as an example of what we'd be looking to do, in terms of depth, we'll be deepening our connections with audiences through the visitor experience and through our comms and our customer relationship management system that we're just about to use. We'll be deepening our understanding of our practice and its impacts, principally through researching what we do and its impacts. And we'll be adding depth to our relationships with partners. In terms of widening, we'll work even harder on audience and workforce diversity. Our learning offer will broaden and be more inclusive. We'll work more internationally. We'll also seek to widen our sphere of influence nationally and internationally through better comms, better communications, and partnerships based on our true strengths. And all of this will be built in a broader and more sustainable and environmentally responsible financial model. So the central philosophy in the new strategy, which is a 5-year strategy, I should have pointed out, 2022 to 2027, is go deep to go wide. We have 6 outcomes in the strategy. So by 2027, we will be more sustainable environmentally and financially. We'll have and offer higher quality audience engagement and experiences. We'll have expanded and diversified our learning provision. We'll have a more diverse audience and workforce. So that's that width again. Our assets, so that's our collections and our sites, will be better known, better understood, and better cared for. And by 2027, we will have greater international reputation and reach. All sounds quite straightforward, doesn't it? I'm sure it'll be quite challenging actually to deliver on those 6 outcomes. But what makes those of this strategy different? Well, it's about sustaining success, as I was talking about earlier, but it's also a balancing act, continuing the good work that's been done in the past, with responding to the challenges and opportunities of today and the next 5 years, while also demonstrating that we're being ambitious for the city. There are some changes in thinking which are a departure actually from what we've done before. And I think there are 5 areas which I'd like to talk about very quickly tonight. The first area is sustainability. So as I mentioned earlier, I think we're now operating within a new value system. There are new expectations within the public and from our funders. And we'll be seeking to balance economic sustainability with environmental responsibility. So what do I mean by that? So in this strategy, we intend as a service to go deeper on our green work, our environmental work. And there are 2 main aspects to that, I think. Greater clarity on our role as a museum service to influence behaviour among the public. And the other aspect is to lead the sector in more green initiatives. And we'll seek to balance that with increasing our sustainability, our resilience financially as a service. So we'll be focusing on passive income. So that's defined as money which flows in regular intervals without need for major investments. There are a number of the lowest hanging fruit, if you like, that we will be seeking to build on. Changes to admissions and membership, to our retail and catering, for example, but also making more of charitable status wherever we can. We've just commissioned a commercial strategy, which will help us spot areas where we can improve our income generation and reduce our costs. But all of this will be done in a balanced way. So the key book, if you like, for our strategy, informing our strategy, is Donut Economics by Kate Rayworth. Kate spoke in Leeds a few weeks ago. The council is taking donut economics very seriously. So that's about living within the Earth's resources without impoverishing ourselves, basically. It's about the circular economy, making more of what we have instead of a kind of throwaway society. So that influences our approach on sustainability and indeed a lot of the strategy. And the second area where there's a departure from the past is a greater focus on research. Research, and especially research on our own practice, so socially engaged practice, working with communities, and what we're doing in terms of cultural learning. You can see a picture on the right-hand side there of one of our learning workshops. We'll be seeking to research what we do a bit more, to magnify the work that we're doing and to understand it more, and also to attract HE funding, so higher education funding. Research will allow us to understand more about what we're doing and to widen the impact of that across the region, across the nation, and across the world, hopefully. There's also in this strategy a great focus on diversity. So that's a strand or a theme that runs right through the document. So that runs from diversification of our income streams to diversifying our learning offer. For example, we'll be focusing more on early years education. We'll be focusing more on home educating families. And there's a disproportionate number of children with additional needs in home educating families. And we'll be deepening our work on initial teacher training. So although we have a good reputation for cultural learnings, that's using objects in learning, formal and otherwise, we'll be stepping that up and diversifying our offer. And we'll also be diversifying our audiences and workforce. We'll be stepping up our work on anti-racism and our work on colonial histories too. The fourth area where I think this is a departure from what we've done in the past is fundraising. So we'll be seeking to support large capital projects and programs with a different way of fundraising. We're in the process of recruiting a development manager at the moment, and the development manager, which is a fixed term post, will have 3 main objectives. The first is to write a fundraising strategy for the whole service. The second is to set up a development foundation, which is a charity which will fundraise on behalf of Leeds Museums and Galleries. That's never been done before, even though we are very grateful to the support of charities who do support us. This development foundation will be set up for large capital projects and fundraising associated with those. And the third area that the development manager will look at is individual giving and large grant applications. So fundraising is something that marks this strategy out. Also, fifthly, the strategy, I think, will encourage the service to be more outward facing, to be more extrovert, more outgoing. So we will up our advocacy and communications. We'll have greater confidence in owning events. We'll put the civic collection at the heart of the city's international relationships. And we hope to play an important role in Leeds 2023. We'll also be encouraging our properties to be a bit more outgoing and to be even more welcoming. So what we see as a result of the strategy, well, 2023 is an important year for the city. We will be programming alongside 2023, and in particular 3 strands which the 2023 agency has come up with. The first is hidden and untold stories. We'll be working with partners on Smeaton 300 at Leeds Industrial Museum, and the Preservative Party, which is our young persons curators group, will be organising a number of displays at City Museum, including a hip-hop exhibition, which will be quite fun. The second strand we'll be working with 2023 on is Radical Acts. We'll be working with the artist Rose English at the Art Gallery, and we will perhaps be showing some of the Arts Council England collection there as well. And the third strand is Playful Adventures. So there'll be exhibitions at Abbey House, which will relate to sport and play, as well as a programme with community groups across the city. We also hope to work with partners on commissions for some of our properties, artistic commissions, creative commissions. What differences will we start to see across the city? Well, I think one of the greatest differences will be online. So we hope to publish a database of 1.3 million objects during 2023. We will also be pushing a bit more. We'll be a bit pushier as an organisation in terms of our marketing. So I mentioned earlier that we've adopted a customer relationship management system that will allow us to form smoother relationships with our customers, to encourage people to visit other events that they found interesting in the past. We'll have a more diverse workforce and audience during the course of this strategy, and we'll be doing more research on non-visitors to see who doesn't visit us than we've done in the past, as well as setting up a community reference panel to see if our programming is relevant for all communities in Leeds. During the period 2022 to 27, the condition of our assets should improve. And we're exploring new ways of funding this, as I've said, and our fundraising ask will be more overt. So as you go into some of our venues, there'll be something which is asking you, if you can donate, please do so. We haven't done that in the past. What about individual sites? Well, I chose a picture of the hedgerow, which is not the most beautiful picture in the world, but I think it conveys the confusion that sometimes exists on Victoria Gardens. So I took this picture about a week ago. Even when the amusements aren't there, I think it's still quite an confusing cultural offer. We have 3 magnificent institutions on who are neighbours on Hedgerow. We have the City Library on the left-hand side, we have the Art Gallery in the middle, and then we have the Henry Moore Institute on the right-hand side. I think for visitors, this is quite a confusing offer. I'm not suggesting that we rationalise, but I think it could be presented in a better way. The infrastructure at each of the partner institutions could be better. That's an understatement. I don't think the facilities or the offer at the moment match the quality of the collections or the ambitions of each of the partners. So in the next year, we'll be commissioning a vision and master plan for Hedgerow, working with the City Library and the Henry Moore Foundation to conceive of a vision for the future. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight, but we will be seeking the views of stakeholders and the public on the future of this one site. What about Temple Newsome and Lotherton? Well, we're expecting a change of governance and management at those 2 sites, and you say, well, so what? Well, at the moment, there isn't single management of those sites, and I think that in itself leads to quite a confusing visitor offer. Over the next year or so, we will be resolving the management. At the moment, Leeds Museums and Galleries works in partnership with Parks and Countryside. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I think both partners feel that single management is needed there. So expect to see changes at those 2 sites. Crickstall Abbey will be experimenting more with digital to provide a more exciting visitor experience. At our 2 mills, Armley and Thwaite, we'll be focusing on better facilities, excuse me, and on strengthening the identity of the sites. So we're commissioning a conservation plan for Thwaite at the moment, looking at what's special about that site and focusing on the theme of industry and environment, both at Armley and at Thwaite. So that's something of the future. What about the process of putting the strategy together? Well, my role, I think, is to bring a bit of my own experience and forethoughts into the process, but mostly to listen and to ask questions. Now, the starting point for me was the interviews for the job, which was back in March, and I identified areas where I thought the service could improve. Also, when I came into the job, I made notes of my first impressions of almost everything, which really helped. But for me, the start of the process, apart from that, that kind of prehistory, if you like, I think was at Sunnybank Mill, which you can see pictured here. I had a meeting with my senior management team in the summer, and it was very useful, I think, to get a sense of what matters to the service. And my role really was to lead the conversation, mostly asking questions of the senior management team. And also, another good thing, which was part of the process, was that foolishly, I agreed to my boss, Eve Roothouse, who's very good. I agreed before I started that I would give her a 2-month review to take stock after 2 months on my time and to check thinking really with her on what the future might hold. That and the time frame for our national portfolio organisation application with Arts Council England, which is actually in May of this year. We'll be submitting to get £1.6 million a year again. That put pressure on us getting a strategy in a certain kind of reduced time frame. And I think that deadline was, it ratcheted up the pressure, but it was useful in that the process could have been quite protracted and the result overcooked had we more time. So we had roughly about 6 months to do the strategy. And I was in listening mode, as well as bringing some of my own impressions, of course, to bear. But from what I was hearing from stakeholders and from the service themselves, a pattern was emerging, which came to me in all places in the shower one morning. It's when you don't think about something that patterns emerge, I find. And all of the thinking seemed to be about making more of what we've got. That in itself was already having an impact on the service, you know, that kind of circular economy. But what if we went deeper still? That in itself wouldn't necessarily lead to more impact, but if we amplified that work with research funding, with integrating digital across all we do, with more international work and enhanced comms and advocacy, that might just do the trick. So that's where deepening connections, widening impact came from. We would take what matters to the service and use this as a driving force for addressing weaknesses and seizing opportunities. Now, the service had been using objectives, but I think outcomes are much more powerful, and so too do our funders, Arts Council England and the Council, in fact. What was emerging gradually was 6 of these 6 outcomes, which I saw you saw in the second slide. And the approach we took was to identify owners of the outcomes. So these are senior managers, sometimes partnering with each other. And then for them to recruit people from across the service and across the council to form working groups who then fleshed out each of the outcomes. Some really deep thinking on each of the outcomes and put objectives against them. We also consulted with key stakeholders along the way. And we did this in different ways. For example, we would send drafts of the document to elected members and to organisations. But for community groups and partners, we homed in on particular aspects of the document and held facilitated sessions on focused areas within the document, and also looked at the style of it as well. Does this represent the service that you know, basically? So deepening connections, widening impact is an organising principle, an umbrella, if you like, which seeks to direct in a very broad way while providing freedom within a framework. And really, it was an exercise in grounded theory, which is using what's already there to form patterns and make connections. And it's no coincidence that that approach was taken, because that's what I used in my PhD between 2011 and 2014. So Rachel mentioned earlier that she wanted me to reflect on what I might have brought to the table. So I'll finish with some reflections on that. Now, one of the most useful, no, my slides are not moving on. There we are. One of the most useful lessons I learned during my PhD was when I was asked to write a book review, excuse me, of a collection of articles on learning in museums. And that's the book there on the left-hand side. It's a book called Museums and Design Education, Looking to Learn, Looking to See. Sorry, Learning to See, by Cook, Reynolds and Spate, 2010. One of my supervisors, who was an educationalist, said, before you read the articles, get to know something about the author first. And I was like, really? Is that any use? He would always speak about people before he would speak about ideas. And he said, knowing something about the author before you read their work, and it was a collection of articles on learning and the use of digital. He said, knowing something about the author will color how you read the article, and you'll be aware of their worldview. And this will help you reflect on your own in the forthcoming thesis that you're about to write. In the process of being critical, you'll know where the gap lies for your own work. So just as I have been introduced, I suppose that you should have picked up that will color my view on what should go in the strategy and what shouldn't. So I think undoubtedly some of my fingerprints are on deepening connections, widening impact. And I think there are a few areas where I have perhaps strengthened things where others might not have. The first is faith in figures. So numbers are important to me. They were important in my methodology in my PhD. I took great strength from Lord Kelvin, saying that without a knowledge of numbers, we have a meager grasp on a subject. So you'll find numbers throughout the strategy, not as a replacement for qualitative analysis and the value of people, but just as a way of stressing where we should be investing, where priorities are, how we can measure progress. For example, we'll be trying out a collections care index within the strategy, which will give us a numerical measure of how well we're looking after our properties, how well we're looking after our artifacts. So the ability to quantify change is really important to me, and I think that will probably be reflected in the strategy. Also, a love or an appreciation of research. The value of the deep dive is there in right throughout the strategy. So I was a research fellow for 3 years at the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon, as Rachel touched upon earlier. I was also responsible with the National Trust of Scotland for commissioning research on our properties, principally to go into conservation plans. So I'm a great believer in forming an intellectual framework which we can then use to improve the visitor experience and improve use of heritage assets. There's a great deal of pragmatism in the document, pragmatism which I found among colleagues within the service, but I'm a great believer that research is all well and good, but it should in turn influence and improve our practice and that of the sector. And that research in itself will bring funding. So I'm not daft, as they say in Scotland. There is a kind of meaning in my madness. Research is all well and good, but it brings welcome attention and welcome money as well. There's a kind of common theme of digital humanities. My own interest in digital is everywhere, I think, in the strategy, but digital to improve the visitor experience and usage of assets. Before I even became aware of the job in Leeds, during lockdown 1, I used to go on walks around Glasgow, and my podcast of choice was Museums in That, which began in February 2019 it must have been, and it's made by museums, Leeds Museums and Galleries. It's brilliant. If you haven't heard it before, it's now on series 4. I'm one of the interviewees in series 4, and it was a lot of fun to make. But I think for me, it encapsulates what's special about Leeds Museums and Galleries. There's a care and attention for people, but also an irreverence, and it's packaged in an innovative way, using digital technology as a way of reaching people. So it's that depth in its fascination for people and its relatedness, but the width, it comes from the use of digital technologies. So that's what I hope to see much more of in the strategy. Also, my own career has been built on an attention to relevance and inclusion. The first time I became aware of Leeds Museums and Galleries was through the Picture Library, which has been running continuously since the 1960s. So this is a service that we offer to all of Yorkshire, actually, to make art accessible for everyone. So you can have a picture or work of art from our collection on display in your house, almost like a library service. So you can change it if you like on a biannual basis. So I think that's a great thing. I think it democratizes art and the heritage assets of the city. So for me, that is something that I'd like to develop more, as well as using relevance and meaning wherever we can. I think that fits naturally with Leeds values, and we're already up and running with that in some of the conservation planning that we've just undertaken at Temple Newsam and Lotherton. But it's not all about me. I've learned a great deal from colleagues in Leeds. There's a tremendous hive mind across the service. You know, the sum is greater than the parts, definitely. It's a values-based decision-making process within Leeds, which is very strong. The service cares about detail. It cares about individuals. It cares about the environment. So we're very lucky to have it, and I'm very lucky to be here and share in some of that. So the strategy is a product of that magnificent attention on the visitor and the user and on people. The strategy will be published the week commencing the 21st of March and will be available on our website as soon as possible after that. Hot on the heels of the strategy, we'll also be producing an action plan to make it happen. That's all I've got. Does anyone have any questions? I'll just stop sharing my screen.
David, thank you very much indeed for your talk. I mean, it's just really exciting, and I think we can see how the museums and galleries are really going to move forward in many ways. And there's always a conundrum about the past and the future, isn't there? And making the past relevant to the future, and shaping the future as well. And I think you're covering many things there. So thank you very much for that. We wish you well with all of that.
Thank you.
Good, great. So you now is the time when you can turn on your microphones, folks, and cameras as well, if you want, and ask David a question, or you can write it in the chat. And I'm keeping an eye on the chat, as is Rachel, so we can read out your question if you wish.
There's no heckling either, Eric. I was very surprised.
No, that's right. So there's unanimity in the audience. It's a very, very big, very big golden thumbs up there, I think. Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
May I fire away?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Interesting, David. Have you presented this strategy yet to the council or your committee? Or
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it has to go via 4 committees. Yes, in fact 5. Yeah, so it goes to the final committee is the executive board. So it's a conveyor belt, really, of committees at various levels within the council, who each get their chance to have a say on how it's shaped. To be honest, there have been very minor comments, and all of them have been helpful, I think. So we're at the final stage now. So the strategy is geared up to go to the executive committee and get executive approval from councillors, actually. So we're almost there.
Do I take it you've done a bit of sounding out to make sure you're not going to be knocked back?
Yes, yeah. The key thing is actually our executive board member, the deputy leader of the council, Councillor Pryor. So I've presented twice to Councillor Pryor. Once was after 2 months in the service, just to get a kind of sense check with him. and also I presented in January the what has become the main strategy. So he was very supportive, and so has my boss, Eve Roothouse, who's the Chief Officer for Culture and Economy. So yeah, the comments have been relatively minor from other colleagues, thankfully.
Plain sailing then, very good. Thank you.
Yeah. It's there are a lot of forms in the council, but yeah, lots of interest.
So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, David. Are you looking at the chat too? So
Yeah.
Rebecca has a question about the history of the service, and does anything from that inform your thinking about your strategy?
Well, just in what I was saying there about the picture library, I think that there is a long history of social values in the service. So I'd be loath for us to depart from that line of travel. I mean, that was the first time it became apparent to me, coming from the National Trust for Scotland. No criticism intended of NTS. It's a well-meaning organisation, but sometimes I felt as if the social values were perhaps fainter within that organisation, and certainly there wasn't as much attention on community within that service. But that's very strong in Leeds. So I just didn't want to break whatever I inherited, because it's a precious thing. Are you meaning about the prehistory of the art gallery? Right. Okay. I'd love to read your book on the prehistory of the art gallery, especially since we're on the cusp of visioning and master planning for that site. So please do get in touch.
So Rebecca's saying it's coming out next year. So
great.
Very good. Very good. So Cliff is saying about is it going to be a forum to gather?
We have the various fora, I suppose, for different projects. We don't have an advisory group per se, a fixed advisory group, but there will be a forum, for example, for visioning and master planning for Hedgerow as part of public consultation. We've got fora for Lotherton and Temple Newsome for the conservation planning that's happening there. We will be setting up the community reference panel that I mentioned earlier, that relevance check. So we've got various different sort of contact points, I suppose you could say, across the city. We don't actually have a forum specifically for the strategy because it's so overarching and wide-ranging. And yes, we will be including Victoria Gardens in the vision and master plan for the Hedgerow site, because I think it's really critical, actually, that we include all of that civic space.
Great. So how about more digital from Chris and Anne? Any other plans to reach online audience?
Yeah, we're hoping to publish our database next year. That's subject to funding. So we have a database called TMS, which is 1.3 million objects. We have information on some parts of the collection already online. So we have information on our sculpture and paintings collections on Art UK, for example. And we use specialist scientific databases for natural science collections, for example. But there's not a one-stop shop, if you like, for everything that's in the LMG collection, which of course we built on since the Society started it in the early 19th century. So I'm very keen to get our database online next year, perhaps with a bit of fanfare because of 2023, and any help Society can provide would be much appreciated. But we're also we've got two main platforms at the moment. One is mylearning.org, which is hugely popular. Actually, we get over 2 million page views on that. My Learning stands for Museums Yorkshire Learning, and it's very popular with schools in the Yorkshire area, but also nationally and internationally. And as well as that, we've got our main website, which has about 1 million page views a year. We're keen to build on that. Social media is also very important to us. And we're also working with the University of Leeds, Tom Jackson, in the immersive technologies field. He's very keen to work with us on improving the visitor experience at Kirkstall Abbey, for example. We might be dabbling in non-fungible tokens, which you might have heard about in the news, and creating some NFTs with our art collection in particular, particularly for 2023, and investing heavily in the customer relationship management system that we spoke about, which is called Tessitura.
Okay. So Morag is another Scot. Makes at least three of us here.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Who is asking about how the museum service envisages itself enlarging its offering online. Well, I guess you've sort of covered that. I mean, just one more thing about online is that, I mean, obviously a lot of museums, do offer talks, and just as part of their normal service, focusing on certain objects even, and getting people from even different parts of the world to talk about it. Is that something that you might be thinking about? But there's also your international dimension, which we haven't really talked very much about.
Yeah, well, so it's about using the Civic Collection to form the heart of relationships with partners across the world. So the city already has partners, for example, in Brno in the Czech Republic, in Durban in South Africa, in Dortmund in Germany, in Lille and in France. In fact, we have an exchange visit next week from Lille. But also, so in our international work, we'll try and build on the existing relationships which exist in the city and with other parts of the world, Hangzhou as well in China. But we'll also be focusing on international communities already in Leeds, largely migrant communities. Just to answer the question from Alan, yeah, that is a bit of a challenge, but we are stepping up our contemporary collecting and seeking to diversify our collecting to represent the Leeds of now. Just as the Leeds of then was represented, we need to keep up with that process of a city on the move, if you like. It can be quite challenging, but I strongly believe that the future of civic museums and others is not necessarily in the originality of what we have, but in the originality of what we do with it. So the onus is less on what we have and more about our creativity in finding relevance and connections with people from other parts of the world.
I mean, can I just sort of ask a bit of a follow-up to Alan's question? I mean, how do you decide about acquisitions? What about expanding collections? And do you have any principles about that? Or
yeah, we've got policy. So we've got policy on which aspects of collecting that we ought to focus on. So if we have weak areas, which if there are bald patches, for want of a better expression, in the collection, then where we ought to perhaps invest more effort. For example, LGBT history. So the civic collection up until about a decade ago underrepresented LGBTQ+ people. So it's about working with communities, LGBTQ+ communities, in figuring out what is valuable to them and then collecting that. So it's not about doing it in isolation. It's very much about connectedness and being informed by those who know best. We have a committee, I should say, as well. So I don't make the decisions on what we collect, actually.
Really?
I sit with my colleagues and we meet once a month and make decisions on collecting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Liz Minkin, yeah, please ask a question.
Thank you. Well, I should look forward to what you're saying about the vision and master plan about Victoria Gardens, because that is a central space. But of course, because I've known it so long, it doesn't seem at all confusing to me. There's the Henry Moore Centre and there's the art gallery. Inside, it would be lovely to have that connection open again from Henry Moore into the art gallery. And then we know that we can get from the art gallery into the library. We can get into the library from outside. We can get the craft and design gallery underneath, which has now got Visit Leeds as part of it. So I was just wondering, firstly, what struck you as a newcomer about it being confusing, and have you any initial ideas, or are you going to wait for somebody else to be paid to tell you about a vision and master plan, or are you thinking that you're going to fill that space? Is that going to be part of your planning, or rather as a factor that might be considered in your planning?
Well, I'll answer the first question first, but thanks, Liz. So my first impressions of that square were, okay, you've got something called the Henry Moore Institute on the right-hand side, which I don't think looks the most inviting building in the world. And what is the Henry Moore Institute, question mark? I mean, I know who Henry Moore was. So you've got that on the right-hand side. You've got the art gallery in the centre with an addition to the frontage. Just below it, you've got something called the Craft and Design Gallery. You've got a shop on the left-hand side, which is also Visit Leeds. You've got a cafe, which is not obvious that it's a cafe, the Tiled Hall Cafe, which is a beautiful resource, which sits within the art gallery, or is it the library? There is a library on the left-hand side as well. There's a war memorial. There's a huge chess set. There's all sorts of things going on in that square, and I just don't think it does Leeds justice. So the approach will be taken. I mean, I'm not an architect, and I don't claim to be a spatial designer, but the approach we're likely to take is to not look at the hedgerow first of all, is to look at what the city needs really in terms of those cultural services, and then to look at the site itself. In common with most other major refits over the past 10, 20 years, what's likely to happen is that the offices will move out and the visitor will move in. So if you look at any of the great refurbishments like Kelvin Grove, for example, in Glasgow, there used to be offices in the basement. All of the offices were cleared out and it's now exhibition space, and I think it does very well for that. There are large parts of the art gallery which you don't access during a typical visit. There are large parts of the library, less so with the Henry Moore Institute, that you can't access at the moment. So it is really quite a big block. Are we making the best use of the vantage points within those buildings as well? For example, something that we want to do in the short term is move the shop to a more accessible location within the art gallery and to reopen the terrace as a cafe. So the terrace looking onto Victoria Gardens, we can do that hopefully within 12 months. So that's not dependent on the vision and master plan. So it's really just about looking at the services that we need for the city, then homing in on the hedgerow and asking, is there a better solution to the use of these buildings? The library, I'm not sure what the long-term ambitions of the library are. Now, we'll have British Library North coming to the city. That changes the dynamic within the city centre. Our library colleagues are on board with this process, so we keep an open mind, I think, on the whole thing, but I just think it's quite confusing and not the best use of those buildings at the moment.
Okay, well, I think we look forward to that. That's you're raising good questions. But so finally, my other question is, how will you keep in touch with these existing societies in Leeds, because there is a wealth of experience and ideas. Like the Thoresby Society, like the Leeds Phil and Lit, the Leeds Library, other institutions in the city that have not yet been mentioned that will be part of your consultations. Yeah,
well, the first thing we'll do is build it into the brief for the consultants. So they will be required. They will be required to consult with key stakeholders, and we can list them as well as, of course, speaking to yourselves. So yeah, that's part of the process. I mean, that's part of the process for. We've just commissioned 2 conservation plans, one for Lobberton, one for Temple Newsome. Yeah. We're in the process. In fact, we're interviewing tomorrow for a conservation plan for Thwaite. It's built into the brief actually that you must consult. So traditionally, these conservation plans have arrived at significance themselves. So it's a panel of experts who normally just say, this is important, this is important, this is important. Well, we've built it into the brief that's not enough, really. They need to consult stakeholders, especially local people, on where meaning lies for people and where use value lies and relevance. So in the same way, we would expect that of the vision and master plan for Hedgerow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Anybody? Yes, Robin, you've got a question.
Yes, obviously grand plans are in progress. To a visitor who goes to the museum shortly or this year, will they see anything which encourages them to think that things are going to change, or is, in other words, have you got any short-term ideas to say to people, things are going to get a lot better, and here's how we're going to do it?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, Robin. Yeah, the quick wins, I suppose, really, basically, and signs of change. Well, I think, when I just mentioned there in passing the relocation of the shop and having a cafe open in the art gallery, I think this is something quite obvious. Indeed, it's something that's been done in the past, but it's hopefully a sign of change and change to the quality of the visitor experience. We've been consulting over the past 6 weeks on the proposal to charge non-Leeds residents admission to Kirkstall Abbey. Not always popular with people who don't live in Leeds, I suppose, but it's just something that we need to consult on, at least in terms of improving the raising income. But at the same time, we're going to be improving the visitor experience for everyone. So there'll be no admission charge to Kirkstall Abbey, but we will be increasing the quality of visitor experience there. So more digital interaction. There's a new audio tour, which we're launching next month for Kirkstall Abbey. So that will be something that you see almost straight away. Other changes will take longer to become obvious, I think, really. We're also improving some of the facilities across the service, as well as training for front of house staff. So perhaps subtle changes, but hopefully appreciable over the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Have we got any more questions?
Well, I'd just like to ask something, actually, Eric, if I might. Are there any more things in the chat that we haven't attended to then?
I don't think so. I think
jolly good. Yeah. Okay, I didn't want to leap in. So I'm just interested in this one wonderful sort of multivariate and the widening and deepening and the digital all going on together. I'm thinking about the fundraising. Have you considered whether having this 1.3 million objects digitally on view, is there a chance there for corporate sponsorship of individual objects or categories of objects with the names of companies being on the screen without it being too cheesy and overwhelming?
Yeah, I think we could do a lot more on that. I also thought about corporate sponsorship in terms of the picture library. So I was in India 5 years ago, and I stayed in quite a nice hotel in New Delhi, and each room had a display case with an artifact in it. So when I came to Leeds and found out about, well, I knew about the picture library anyway, but just that it's still going and it's still wonderful, I wondered whether we could work with a hotel partner and run a scheme called Sleeping with Art. So there would be a picture in every room, and we would encourage a partnership donation from the hotel, but also encourage people who are spending the weekend perhaps in Leeds to visit some of our sites and also to make a donation that way. We've also been approached by corporate sponsors for the podcast that I mentioned earlier, Museums and that. And we sit as a service within culture and economy. So some of my colleagues are very keen to work with us on commercializing more than we have been doing in the past, but that would include sponsorship as well, I think.
Great. Yes, probably not choose the Charge of the Scots Greys, whatever it's called, or the one with the fierce tiger as one for hotel rooms. But yeah,
could get sleep, could you?
Yeah, fantastic idea though. And it's also occurring to me as you're talking about also your research with the audiences about the collection of real-time feedback, especially from children at the sites, and that could in turn be sponsored. Everybody always goes to BJSS because they've been wonderful at supporting everything digital, but there might be other digital companies in the city who would like to get in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're about to work with a company called Navilens. Navilens. So this is about making signage audible. So it's for people with visual impairments. In fact, the company is right next to me in Leeds here. So we're going to be, they produce signage, this kind of signage for the Paris Underground. So we're going to be experimenting with that. So it's about using digital to be inclusive. And we're probably going to be trialing it at Kirkstall Abbey, actually. But yeah, very keen to work on anything like that, really, which is innovative and inclusive at the same time, and even better if it brings in money.
So also I was just thinking about the energy from the river at Armley and Thwaite, and whether there's anything can be done to actually harness the energy again.
Well, we've been. I got an email 3 weeks ago from a local creator of generators who's keen to install at Thwaite. In fact, given the recent floods, there would be no shortage of turning power. In fact, those two sites were badly hit, so we're still cleaning up at those two sites. But that is a definite possibility. I mean, I think industry and environment are such an obvious theme, really, at those two sites that that we ought to make more of it. So there is flood defence work just started at Armley, actually. So 2.6 million pounds being invested at that site. So it shouldn't be as bad in the future. Thwaite probably always will get the brunt of any sort of river rise, but no, that's a really good idea, Rachel, and it's something that we'd like to do.
Yeah, great.
Right.
Do we have some more questions in there, Eric?
Well, I think Kirsten had a question about dinosaur bones.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
So something about prehistory for you.
All right. He wants to get these back. So I can take that away. I'm not exactly sure. I can ask Claire Brown, who's our natural sciences curator, because I don't know the answer to that one, I'm afraid. And then there's something on the chart of the Royal Scots.
Yes. Well, we like that one. It's not one to show you French visitors, by the way.
Oh yeah. Well, we might just do a kind of might close off the ZIF gallery next week.
Yes, you Lille visitors, maybe put it away for that one.
Yeah.
The actual French eagle that they captured used to be on display in Edinburgh Castle, but that somehow disappeared as well, along with the dinosaur bones. Right.
Plans to redevelop the road system with the development of the Abbey. There is a bid going into the Levelling Up Fund, which I think is about connectivity and the Kirkstall Valley. So I would be surprised if that doesn't improve, particularly for bikes. There is an access issue at Kirkstall Abbey, which we're aware of. If you're a wheelchair user, for example, you can't get close to the visitor centre there. We are proposing to move the cafe over to the visitor centre side. At the moment, it's at Abbey House, so that's also part of our plans for those two sites.
Okay, great. Well, David, you've answered lots of questions there, and thank you very much for that. I should have said actually that David attends our council meetings of Leeds Phil and Lit, and we do have a museums committee. So a joint committee between the Leeds Museums and Galleries and the Society. So we are keeping very much in touch and keeping the tradition going. And we're looking forward to having a society input into many of the things that you're doing. So thank you very much, David, and thank you everybody for logging in tonight and your questions and your participation. So thanks again. Take care, everybody. And Rachel, do you have anything to say about our next activities?
Well, next month, we're hoping that we might have a hot topic talk, aren't we, Eric,
Yes.
on the current circumstances. Yes. We thought we would hope to find somebody who's an expert on Ukraine to give us background. As a society, we steer clear of politics per se, but understanding historical background, I think, would be great. So we're hoping to arrange that at short notice. Deliberately kept that slot free for a hot topic. How could we have imagined that this would be it? And there's also the Astbury conversation that we're invited to the public lecture in April. It's mentioned in the message that I sent recently to all the members, and I will be sending more notification. And then in May, there are already quite a lot of bookings for the event on textiles today, yarn and textiles to fabric today. So do book for that if you haven't already. Janet's hand is raised, I see, Eric.
Just before we get Janet to ask her questions, of course, we have the science fair on.
Oh yes, of course, science fair on the top. Thank you.
On March the 11th, which is a week.
12th, the 12th, Saturday the 12th.
Saturday the 12th, which is a week on Saturday. It's very, very close now. Robin Jakeways, who is in the audience, has been organising that. And it's at the museum. So we will be in the museum live. I think we'll all be there, as they say, personally in person. At least I will, on the 12th of March. So look forward to seeing you there. Now, Janet, please ask your question.
Well, yes, I'm sorry, because there was a welter of other questions. I think one of mine was a bit missed, or the issue I was raising, which was actually, it was about looking at the development of the Victoria Gardens. And are you linking that to the developments that are taking place in Leeds Town Hall? That's the first thing, where they apparently got great plans for improving, for example, Lou's, which for a former singer is quite an issue, but crush bars and things like that. And also, are you linking with perhaps Channel 4, who might, if you're planning special exhibitions, do a program which might attract more people to come to see the actual exhibition? Because I do know BBC4, when it was in its heyday, for example, did some programs involving the British Library or the London Museum, which prompted me to get on a train to go down and see them in London and drag friends from all over the country. The Cheapside Jewellery one was a particular note. I had to run for the train without having had my restaurant meal with my sister. We'd spent far too long. So there are the two things. It's the Victoria Gardens development. How might that link to what's happening in Leeds Town Hall? And indeed involving people like Channel 4.
Two very good questions. Thanks, Janet. Victoria Gardens development, well, the fundraising for the town hall and the work associated with it, that's already started. There might well be some improvements to the front of the town hall, if that's what you mean by that end of Victoria Gardens, as part of that. But I'd need to check. Victoria Gardens in front of City Library, Art Gallery and Henry Moore Institute is very much within scope for the vision and master plan that I'm talking about. So they are at the moment two separate initiatives, if you like. The Town Hall initiative was, it dates back actually a few years now, and they finally got money to refurbish the Broderick Hall, for example. So that we will be speaking to colleagues within events and venues on the plans for Pedro. Channel 4, I think that's an excellent idea. It did actually occur to me that something, behind the scenes and cultural would be a good fit for ourselves and Channel 4, given that their presence in the city is increasing and they are alternative programmers. So I think that's a really good idea and something I'd like to progress.
Great. Thank you very much, David. I think we're going to close the meeting now, and thank you all. Take care. All the best.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yes.